Is a narcissist dangerous? This is a common question that I believe is not particularly helpful because the answer is obviously yes. But if we take the question seriously, we can think, well, you've got two options. You can either say yes or you can say no. If you say no, all is fine. But if you say yes, well, what then? More helpful questions, follow-up questions will be, how specifically is this person dangerous? How much damage can this person actually do? Again, being specific. Once we know this, we can ask the question, let's compare the damage that is done if there is a change and the damage that is done if there is no change. Often people are afraid of changing because they're afraid of what might happen. And using this filter, we get a better idea of what might happen if they change something, but also what might happen or what is certain to happen if they don't change something. So we compare the change versus the damage that is done if things stay the same. And then finally, a relevant question is just asking, what can you do actually to minimize the damage that's being done? If you're minimizing the damage that is being done, you are changing something. And this could create more danger, but we need to assess it to make sure we're minimizing the damage and minimizing our risk. Now, specifically, how can the narcissist do damage? I suggest there are a few ways. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is physical damage. There's a physical danger, a physical threat. Another one, of course, that we know of is the psychological danger and the thoughts. How are these being attacked? How are people being abused morally? How are people integrating toxic thought structures and thinking in ways that are self-damaging and self-sabotaging? People don't often talk about this, but there are a lot of toxic ideas floating around that should be fought if we want to have healthy lives. After we've done this, and this is a point that my friend Caroline on Twitter, hi to Caroline, points out rightly very often that people forget, is the financial damage. How can the person hurt us financially? Then there is the social damage. This is where the flying monkeys come into play. This is where reputations come into play. There can be a lot of damage done very quickly, and that can hurt us terribly. You know, what will the community think? What will the family think, for instance? How will the person hurt us through the social network? And then we have simply other forms of damage. Whatever you can think of, write it down. If you're thinking of it, it might be real. Once you have listed the different types of damage, the question was how much? I suggest using a simple graph such as this one to assess how much damage can be done. So we have different levels of damage, because 1 out of 10 is not the same thing as 9 out of 10 in terms of damage. By the way, people who want you to conflate damage as being damage are not being helpful. It's like, is the person dangerous? Well, yes, but they might be dangerous at 1 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. That makes a world of difference. When people don't want you to see what the difference is, they're messing around with you and they're damaging you and they're attacking you in the head. Here we have physical damage, psychological damage, financial damage, social damage, and other. And what we can do is simply assess how dangerous a person is. So a person might physically be at a 4 out of 10, psychologically damage us at an 8 out of 10, financially it might be a 3, socially it might be a 7, and other might be a 4. Just mapping out the damage is helpful to bring some nuance to avoid going, the person is dangerous or not, does damage or not. We understand better what is happening with this. Once we've done this, we want to compare the two situations. Situation A is the situation with no change, and we can map out the damage that is being done. Situation B is the situation with change. Once we've done this, please remember that situation A has a 100% likelihood of occurring if nothing changes. Well, it's close to 100%. It's probably going to be the same. Situation B, we don't know exactly what the percentage is. There's some level of unknown, which means we have some capacity to influence it and reduce the percentage. But to do that, we need to have a clear understanding of the damage and a strategy to mitigate the damage. Another way of viewing the damage here is to simply see what happens over time. We can assume if nothing changes, I do this in red, then the level of damage remains the same over time. We can assume also if we change something, either things improve directly, or there's a risk that things get worse before they get better. If this is the case, what we want to do is we want to assess what is the probability that things get worse, how bad can they get, and how can we mitigate the probability and reduce it, and also mitigate the level to which things get bad, so that we can also accelerate the improvement. This is where we look for strategies. This is going to be different if there's physical damage that's potential, psychological damage, financial damage, social damage. In all cases, getting some form of help is usually a good idea because we work better as a team and because sometimes we're a little bit overwhelmed, especially if there's been psychological damage happening. Another graph that is helpful here is to look at what is the probability of the damage. For a normal, healthy person, it's simply going to be a downward line. The probability of a normal person doing a lot of damage is very low. This risks being different for a toxic person, where, for example, a verbally, psychologically abusive person, you know that you have a high probability of damage, and the graph might just look like this. So you know that the minimum level of damage is high, and that there's a high probability, and there's a low level that things are actually going to get really bad. For some people, it might actually be rather different. High probability things get really bad, and a lower probability of medium damage. What we want to look at, what's really important, is what is the highest level of damage we can expect, and also what is the lowest level of damage we can expect. Ideally, of course, we want to have a high probability of low damage and be somewhere along here where the damage will never be above a very low amount, because there's no reason to have any damage. It's important to bear this in mind when we're thinking of changing something in the relationship, leaving a person. In this case, we think, for example, that there's a relatively high probability of damage being, let's say, somewhere along here. What we want to understand is what can we do to both reduce the likelihood of the damage and reduce the damage, and basically reduce both of them. What strategies can we put in place to do this? In my videos, I often talk about strategies to change situations, to negotiate better, to try to improve things. There always is an element of danger with this, and the danger is the uncertainty. Now, I always believe that you know your situation best and you can assess what is actually happening in terms of danger and what you're risking. If we look at this situation, take it as a snapshot, and you assess that you're going to change something, the real question is, to what extent, if you change something, are you increasing your danger and the damage that can be done to you? And if so, by how much? And what can you do to actually mitigate this or remove the risk? Or are you simply decreasing the danger, in which case it's the outcome that we want? Quite often, there are no easy answers to this, but you need to start having a good, clear snapshot of how to assess the dangers before you can find a strategy that works. Otherwise, there's just a lot of confusion. And please remember also, if you are comparing two situations, the real question is, what is the risk that you're running if you change something? Quite often, we know exactly what this risk is, but we don't know what the second risk is, what the risk of changing something is. And sometimes if we're reluctant to change, this is one good reason for us to not change and stick with a bad situation. It's the better the devil you know. I'd like you to try to use this tool, if you're stuck in a situation, to simply imagine what might be the case and to think what are the strategies you can implement to make sure that the better scenario actually works out for you better. And this helps you also anticipate the dangers and the threats. We see time and time again somebody leaving a toxic person, assuming everything is going to be okay, and they get absolutely whacked when it comes to the financial danger, the physical danger, or the psychological danger, or the social danger, and they are surprised. This should not be the case. It's understandable. It's understandable because we're afraid, we're trying to extract ourselves from a bad situation, but this is avoidable. So please do what you can to avoid it, stay safe, reduce the risk, try to get more clarity in how you assess these situations. And if someone comes to you to ask for your opinion on this, try to help them map out the danger, to understand what's happening, so they don't hallucinate a danger that doesn't exist, but they don't also misjudge a real danger that could have been detectable and avoidable.